For 6 years, my daughter lived in a world without her own voice. It took a homeless boy who heard unspoken thoughts to reveal the terrifying words she was screaming. My daughter, Amara, was born into a world of sound she could never add to. Her silence was the first thing I noticed after the doctor cleaned her off and placed her in my arms. There was no cry, no wail to announce her arrival. Just wide, curious eyes staring up at me, already taking in the world with a startling intensity. We had left our home, our family, everything we knew, for this new life in a country that promised opportunity. But it felt like the promise had a catch, a cruel, silent joke played on my firstborn. The doctors gave it names: apraxia of speech, severe selective mutism. They'd run tests, shine lights in her eyes, and talk about her in hushed, clinical tones as if she were a puzzle to be solved. To me, she was just Amara, my brilliant, beautiful girl, whose laughter was a silent shaking of her small shoulders, whose anger was a storm in her dark eyes, and whose love was a fierce, desperate grip of her hand in mine. Our sanctuary was the park, a small patch of green squeezed between towering, indifferent buildings. Here, Amara could be herself without the pitying glances of other parents or the frustrated questions of teachers. She would chase pigeons, her little legs pumping, a radiant, soundless smile on her face. She'd watch the other children on the swings, her body swaying in time with them. A wistful look I knew all too well. I learned to read her every twitch, every flicker of her eyelashes. I was her interpreter, her voice. But at night, when she was asleep, I'd lie awake with a hollow ache in my chest, a fear that I would never truly know the universe of thoughts swirling inside her head. I prayed. I begged. I made deals with a God I wasn't sure was listening. Just for one word. Just Mama. That's all I wanted. It was in the park that we first saw the boy. He couldn't have been much older than 16, with a thin frame that seemed lost inside a frayed, oversized hoodie. He was one of the city's ghosts, the kind of person most people train themselves not to see. He had a spot under the old oak tree at the edge of the playground, a worn-out backpack his only possession. He never asked for money. He never bothered anyone. He just sat and sketched in a tattered notebook with a piece of charcoal. At first I was wary. I kept Amara close, my body a shield between my silent daughter and this unpredictable stranger. The city had taught me to be cautious, to see danger in every shadow. But the boy never even looked our way. He seemed absorbed in his own world, his focus entirely on the paper in his lap. Weeks turned into months. The boy, Leo, as we later learned his name was from the park warden, became a permanent fixture of our daily routine. The sun would shine, Amara would play, and Leo would draw. My fear of him slowly dissolved, replaced by a dull, aching pity, and then a reluctant curiosity. I noticed that he wasn't just drawing the trees or the buildings. His eyes, a startlingly clear blue in his grime-streaked face, would follow Amara. It wasn't creepy or predatory. It was different. He watched her with the same intensity she watched the world. He saw the way she'd tilt her head to listen to a bird song, the way her tiny fingers would trace the pattern on a leaf. He wasn't looking at a mute girl. He was looking at a person. One crisp autumn afternoon, the cruelty of children shattered our peace. A group of older kids, loud and boisterous, descended on the playground. They noticed Amara, who was trying to get a turn on the slide. "Hey, what's wrong with you?" one of them sneered. "Cat got your tongue." Amara froze, her small body rigid. She looked at me, her eyes wide with panic and humiliation. My blood ran cold, then hot with a familiar protective rage. I stood up, ready to march over there and unleash a storm of my own. But before I could take a single step, a shadow fell over the scene. It was Leo. He had moved from his spot under the tree with a quiet swiftness that was almost unnerving. The bullies fell silent, eyeing his ragged clothes and gaunt face. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs, expecting a confrontation, a fight, anything. But he ignored the other kids completely. He walked right past them and knelt in front of my daughter. Amara stared up at him, her lip trembling. He said nothing. He just opened his sketchbook and turned it so she could see the page. The bullies craned their necks to look, then scoffed and wandered away, their entertainment spoiled. I walked over slowly, my hand ready to snatch Amara away. I peered over her shoulder at the open page. It wasn't a portrait of her. It was a chaotic, beautiful swirl of charcoal lines, a vortex of light and shadow. At its center was a tiny, perfect rendering of a sparrow, wings outstretched, breaking free from the chaos. And I stopped breathing. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a feeling. It was the exact image I had created in my own mind to describe Amara's frustration to her doctors. I called it her silent storm. And somehow this homeless boy, this stranger who had never heard a single word from me, had drawn the contents of my soul. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the sound of the playground fading into a dull roar in my ears. The world narrowed to the piece of paper in my daughter's hands. Leo didn't wait for a reaction. He gave Amara a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if they were old friends sharing a secret. Then he turned and walked back to his oak tree, melting back into the cityscape as if he'd never moved. Amara's fingers traced the image of the sparrow. Her eyes, usually so guarded, were wide with a look I hadn't seen before. Recognition. It was as if she were looking into a mirror for the very first time. She clutched the drawing to her chest, a precious treasure, and for the rest of the afternoon, she didn't let it go. She didn't need the slide anymore. She sat on the bench beside me, perfectly still, just holding the image of her own soul, drawn by a boy who didn't know her name. That night, I couldn't sleep. The drawing lay on the nightstand, and in the dim light from the street, the charcoal bird seemed to pulse with a life of its own. How could he have known? The silent storm was a phrase I'd invented in a moment of desperate poetry for a dismissive neurologist. I'd never said it out loud in the park. I'd never written it down where anyone could see. It was a secret between me and my own heart, a private language for my daughter's pain. The logical part of my brain screamed for an explanation. Coincidence? A lucky guess? But looking at the fierce, determined eyes of that sparrow, I knew it was more than that. The boy hadn't just drawn a bird. He had drawn her hope. My hope. The next day, my fear was overshadowed by a desperate need for answers. I packed an extra sandwich and a bottle of water, my hands trembling slightly. When we got to the park, Leo was already there, sketching. Amara, holding yesterday's drawing, walked right up to him without a moment's hesitation. My heart leaped into my throat, but I forced myself to stay put. She sat on the ground beside him and placed her drawing gently on the grass. He glanced at it, then at her, and a faint smile touched his lips. He tore a fresh sheet from his sketchbook and began to draw again. I watched this silent communion for almost an hour before I gathered my courage. I walked over, my shadow falling over them. Leo looked up, his blue eyes guarded. "I'm Amara's mother," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He just nodded. "The drawing? It was... How did you know?" He looked down at his charcoal-stained fingers, a blush creeping up his neck. "I don't know," he mumbled, his voice raspy from disuse. "I just see it. The pictures, the feelings. They're loud." He gestured vaguely towards his head. "In other people, especially her. Hers are very clear, like music." The explanation made no sense, and all the sense in the world. He wasn't seeing with his eyes. He was seeing with something else. From that day on, our ritual changed. I would bring Leo food, and he would give Amara a drawing. They were dispatches from her inner world, a drawing of a tangled, knotted ball of string after a frustrating day with her speech therapist, a picture of a single, vibrant yellow balloon floating in an empty sky on a day she felt happy but lonely. He was her translator. He was giving her the voice she didn't have. He gave her a way to tell me her secrets, and my gratitude was so profound it felt like a physical weight in my chest. I stopped seeing a homeless boy. I saw a miracle in a frayed hoodie. I started talking to him. I told him about our old home, about the scent of jasmine and the taste of my mother's cooking. I told him about the difficult journey, the fear, the hope that brought us here. He was a quiet listener, never interrupting, his eyes fixed on his paper as his hands moved. He never spoke of his own past, and I didn't dare ask. We existed in this strange, fragile bubble of the present. One afternoon, I was watching Amara play, a wave of profound melancholy washing over me. I was thinking of my own mother, who had passed away years before we left. I was lost in a vivid memory, being 5 years old, sick with a fever, and my mother sitting by my bed, humming a lullaby. The window was open, and the blue shutters she had painted herself were framed by the evening light. It was a memory so personal, so deeply buried, I hadn't thought of it in years. It was a moment of pure, unconditional love that I ached to give Amara. I wiped a tear from my eye, hoping Leo hadn't noticed. Later, as the sun began to set, he packed up his meager belongings. He handed Amara her daily drawing as usual. She ran to me, her face alight with excitement, and held it up. I took the paper from her, expecting another beautiful abstraction of her feelings. But this was different. My blood ran cold. It was a photorealistic sketch, rendered with impossible detail. It was a portrait of a woman, her face soft with love, her lips parted as if she were humming, and she was framed perfectly inside a window with old, peeling, unmistakably blue shutters. My knees felt weak. I sank onto the bench, the drawing trembling in my hand. The woman was my mother. The curve of her smile, the way a strand of hair escaped her headscarf, the kindness in her eyes, it was all there. It was her. The blue shutters were not just blue. They were the exact shade of cobalt she had mixed herself, with the same tiny chip in the paint on the bottom left corner where I had once crashed my toy cart. This wasn't a memory. It was a photograph pulled from the deepest, most sacred vault of my mind. I looked up wildly, searching for Leo. He was at the edge of the park, his back to me, about to disappear into the evening crowds. "Wait!" I screamed, my voice cracking. The sound was so jarring in our usually quiet world that several people turned to look. He paused but didn't turn around. I stumbled to my feet, clutching the drawing, and ran to him, Amara trailing anxiously behind me. "This!" I gasped, holding up the paper. My voice was a choked mess of disbelief and terror. "This is my mother. The shutters. This is my childhood bedroom. From my home. Thousands of miles away. How? How did you do this?" He finally turned, and for the first time, I saw fear in his clear blue eyes. He looked haunted. "I told you," he whispered, his voice desperate. "I see pictures. They get loud. I just have to draw them to make them quiet. I'm sorry if I scared you." He tried to turn away again, but I grabbed his arm. My touch was gentle, but my grip was steel. "Don't go," I begged. "Please, I don't understand, but I'm not scared. I don't know what I am, but I'm not scared of you." He looked from my face to Amara, who was hiding behind my legs, her small hand clutching my jeans. She peeked out, her own dark eyes wide with a question she couldn't ask. Leo's posture softened. The fear in his eyes receded, replaced by a profound weariness that made him look ancient. He came home with us that night. It felt both insane and like the only logical thing to do. I couldn't let this boy, this impossible, miraculous boy, sleep on the cold ground after he had just handed me a piece of my own soul. Our apartment was small, just 2 rooms and a tiny kitchen, but it was warm and clean. I made him shower while I cooked, my hands going through the motions of chopping and stirring while my mind raced. Who was he? What was he? A psychic? An empath? Some kind of angel in disguise? The words felt clumsy and inadequate. He emerged from the bathroom in a pair of my late husband's old sweatpants and a t-shirt, which hung loosely on his thin frame. With the grime washed away, I could see he was younger than I thought, maybe not even 16. His face was all sharp angles and vulnerability. He ate ravenously, silently, as if he hadn't had a proper hot meal in years. After dinner, Amara, who had been watching him with a quiet intensity, walked over to him. She had the drawing of her grandmother in her hands. She held it out to him, then pointed to the woman in the picture, and then she did something that shattered my heart into a million pieces. She pointed to herself. A silent question. "Is she mine?" Leo looked at the drawing, then back at Amara's pleading face. He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, his voice soft. "She's your grandmother. She loved you very much. She hums for you sometimes. When you're sad?" He looked at me, a silent apology in his eyes for intruding on something so private. Tears streamed down my face, hot and unstoppable. I was crying for my mother, for my silent daughter, for this broken boy who saw the ghosts that lived inside of us. He stayed on our couch that night. The next day, he stayed again. And the day after that. A week passed. He and Amara developed a language that went beyond the drawings. He'd see an image in her mind, a frustration, a question, a memory from her babyhood, and sketch it out. She, in turn, would respond with gestures, with expressions, with a hand on his arm. He was her bridge to the world, and she was his anchor in it. I enrolled him in online classes. I bought him new clothes. I watched as the gaunt, haunted look in his eyes was slowly replaced by the tentative spark of a teenage boy. I was so focused on what he was doing for Amara that I almost missed what he was doing for me. He was drawing my memories, my hopes, my deepest fears. He gave me back pieces of myself I thought were lost forever. But with every impossible sketch, a new fear began to grow. What he was doing wasn't normal. It wasn't just a gift. It felt like something raw, something powerful, and something that could draw the wrong kind of attention. I was harboring a secret, a miracle, and I had no idea how to protect him. One evening, about a month after he moved in, Leo was sketching while Amara watched. I was in the kitchen, humming the very lullaby he had drawn. Suddenly he cried out. It was a sharp, strangled sound of pure agony. He dropped his charcoal and clutched his head, his body curling into a ball on the floor. His eyes were screwed shut, and his face was pale and contorted in pain. "Leo!" I screamed, rushing to his side. "What is it? What's wrong?" Amara was frantic, patting his back, her silent panic radiating through the room. "Too loud," he gasped, his voice tight with pain. "So loud, it's not a picture. It's a word. One word. Over and over again." He was trembling violently, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at me, his blue eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before, a terror that chilled me to the bone. I can't draw a word," he choked out. "But I can hear it. It's hers." He pointed a shaking finger at Amara. "And it's screaming." The world stopped. The air in our tiny apartment grew thick and heavy, charged with an impossible energy. Amara stood frozen, her hand still outstretched towards Leo, her eyes locked on his tortured face. A word? After 6 years of absolute silence, there was a word inside my daughter, a word so powerful it was physically hurting the boy who could hear her thoughts. "What word, Leo?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "What is she saying?" He squeezed his eyes shut tighter, his knuckles white as he pressed his fists to his temples. "Fire," he gasped, the word ripped from his throat. "The word is fire. It's bright and hot, and it's burning." He writhed on the floor, and a primal fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my shock. Something was terribly wrong. I scooped him up, his body surprisingly light, and half carried, half dragged him to the couch. Amara followed, her silent panic a palpable force in the room. She kept touching his arm, her little face a mask of confusion and concern. As I laid him down, the smell hit me. Smoke. Faint, but sharp and acrid. I ran to the window and looked out into the hallway of our apartment building. Nothing. But the smell was getting stronger. "It's not a memory," Leo moaned from the couch, his voice weak. "It's... now." My blood turned to ice. I grabbed my keys and phone, my mind a frantic blur. "Amara, shoes! Now!" I commanded, my voice sharp with an urgency she had never heard before. She didn't hesitate. She scrambled to put on her sneakers, her movements quick and precise. I pulled Leo to his feet, slinging his arm over my shoulder. He was limp, his consciousness seemingly flickering, overwhelmed by the silent scream in Amara's head. The moment I opened our apartment door, the scene confirmed our worst fears. A thick, grey haze filled the hallway, pouring from underneath the door of our neighbor's apartment down the hall. A fire. A real one. Panic erupted around us, A smoke alarm began to shriek from a distant apartment, a sound soon joined by others, creating a discordant symphony of terror. People were yelling, doors were slamming open, but all I could focus on was the small, warm hand in mine and the weight of the boy leaning on me. The stairs, I muttered, more to myself than to anyone else. We couldn't take the elevator. We joined the stream of panicked residents heading for the emergency exit. The smoke was getting thicker, stinging my eyes, catching in my throat. Amara started coughing, her small body shaking with each silent, hacking gasp. I could feel Leo's breathing become shallow. The screaming in Amara's head must have been deafening for him. In the chaos of the stairwell, someone jostled me, and I lost my grip on Amara's hand for a split second. It was long enough. The tide of fleeing people separated us. "Amara!" I screamed, my voice raw. I saw her small red jacket disappear around a bend in the stairs below me. My heart stopped. I couldn't go after her while holding on to Leo. "Go," Leo whispered, his voice raspy. She's scared. She's thinking of the park. The oak tree. She's going to our spot." He was seeing her thoughts, her intended path, even through his own agony. "I can't leave you," I cried, my loyalty torn in a gut-wrenching choice. "You have to," he insisted, pushing weakly against me. Just then, a firefighter in full gear appeared on the landing above us, his voice muffled by his mask, shouting instructions. He saw us, saw Leo's state, and immediately came to help. He and his partner took Leo from me, their movements efficient and practiced. "Go find your daughter, ma'am. Get out of the building," one of them yelled. I didn't need to be told twice. I flew down the stairs, my lungs burning, my every cell screaming Amara's name. I burst out of the emergency exit into the cold night air, now filled with the flashing red and blue lights of fire trucks and ambulances. The street was chaos. I scanned the crowd of displaced residents, my eyes darting from face to face. Nothing. Then Leo's words echoed in my mind. The park. The oak tree. I ran. I didn't care about the police lines or the shouting officials. I ran the 2 blocks to our sanctuary. The park was eerily empty, cast in the flickering glow of the distant emergency lights. And there, standing under the massive dark silhouette of the old oak tree, was a small figure in a red jacket. "Amara!" I sobbed, relief washing over me so powerfully my legs almost gave out. She turned, and her face, streaked with soot and tears, crumpled. I ran to her and wrapped her in my arms, holding her so tight I thought she might break. I buried my face in her hair, inhaling her scent, assuring myself she was real. She was safe. She pulled back slightly, her little hands framing my face. She looked at me, her dark eyes clear and focused, filled with an intensity I had never seen before. Her brow furrowed in concentration. Her lips, which had never formed a word, trembled and parted. And then a sound emerged. It was small, raspy, and imperfect. But it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. "Mama!" she croaked. The single word hung in the cold night air, a fragile, perfect miracle. Tears I didn't know I had left began to pour down my cheeks. I just stared at her, speechless. She took a shaky breath and tried again, the word coming out clearer, stronger. "Mama, fire, scared." I hugged her again, laughing and crying all at once. The silent storm had finally broken. The screaming word that had overwhelmed Leo had become the key that unlocked her voice. It was the shock, the fear, the desperate need to communicate, to warn me, that had finally broken through the barrier in her mind. We found Leo sitting on the back of an ambulance, an oxygen mask over his face. When he saw us, he pulled it off. His eyes went straight to Amara. She walked right up to him, a new confidence in her stance. "Leo," she said, her voice still quiet and unused, but clear as a bell. A slow smile spread across Leo's exhausted face. He didn't look surprised. He just looked happy. The storm in her head was quiet, he told me later. All he could hear now was a calm, steady hum, like a happy song. Our lives were never the same after that night. We lost our apartment and everything in it, but we had gained so much more. With the help of the fire department and a local news story that picked up on the miracle, we found a new place to live. Leo, Now officially my son, in all the ways that mattered, thrived. The noise in his head became more manageable, a gift he was learning to control. And Amara? She never stopped talking. Her voice, once unleashed, was a torrent of questions, observations, and stories, 6 years of silence pouring out of her. Sometimes, late at night, I'd watch her sleep. This beautiful, brilliant girl, and I'd think about the impossible journey that brought us here. A mute daughter, a homeless boy, and a connection that defied all explanation. They had saved each other. And in doing so, they had saved me too.